washing machine is going, the birds are chirping, I'm doing some prep for a meal, and I'm going to play Walter Bowart, a talk with Walter Bowart and Ned Potter, discussing his book, Operation Mind Control. If you are unfamiliar with the work of Walter Bowart and his book, and what is revealed through that piece of literature named Operation Mind Control, then you might find this interesting. Here we go.
This is Contemporary Communications Conference. My name is Ned Potter. Today we welcome Walter Bowart, the author of the best-selling book, Operation Mind Control. Hello, Walter.
Hi, Ned.
Your book, Operation Mind Control, published in paperback by Dell Publishers in 1978, is presently out of print, but is due for re-release soon. Operation Mind Control chronicles the research and development efforts by agencies of the U.S. intelligence community to control the perceptions and actions of individuals utilizing a wide variety of techniques, including drugs and drug-assisted interrogation, hypnosis, aversion therapy, electronic dissolution of memory, psychosurgery, bioelectronic implants, microwave transmissions, and numerous other methods of modifying or programming behavior. Your book was the result of a long and costly process of research involving technical assistance from over 45 professional people and the cooperative efforts of many private citizens working without major funding or corporate support, and spurred on by shock and outrage that citizens have been so victimized by their own government. As Richard Condon, author of The Manchurian Candidate, wrote in the foreword to your book, quote, "Please keep fearfully in mind that the astonishing information published in this seminal work of investigative reporting concerning avenues taken to decision and execution by our secret police to fracture or dissolve human minds was drawn directly from federal records and from official laboratory archives, as well as from the reviving memories of those who had already undergone the dehumanizing process." Welcome to LA, Walter Bowart. Thank you for being here. First, I would like to say that your book, Operation Mind Control, is one of the most important books published in the last 25 years, and I'm honored to be able to interview you concerning this subject.
Thanks.
You detailed in Chapter 1 your meetings with veterans who suffered from amnesia. Before these meetings, how did you first become interested in mind control?
Well, I ran into that fellow I identified in the book as David. I've known this guy since he was a little kid. We grew up together. He's a little younger than I. And we played together, and I knew him. And then he went off to Vietnam. He joined the Air Force. And he came back with amnesia and hyperamnesia, vastly improved short-term memory. And he was sitting in the chair in the living room. I didn't recognize him. He looked like, if you've seen the pictures of the repatriated POWs in Korea, they're stooped over and hunched shoulders. He looked like that. And of course he had a almost shaved head, military style, after 4 years. And he was gaunt and thin. He had this hollow stare in his eye. I didn't recognize the guy. And then when I found out what had happened to him with his mother and family, and I interviewed a psychiatrist over a period of time, I got to know the story really well. And I found out that this guy had been programmed to carry secret messages locked behind post-it note blocks, very sophisticated form of mind control, where he'd been put in front of a computer somehow, and there'd been this feedback with gibberish of coded information. So a guy would come up to him. One time he described a story of going to a hotel room in Australia, and he thought he was on vacation. 5 days into the vacation, knock on the door, a man shows up, says something that contains the phrase, "rose nose," triggers him, off goes the gibberish, which is 9 is 46, and out comes this coded information that he doesn't know what it meant. but he knew it verbatim. He also was a trained human tape recorder. He was a video camera, if you will, sound and audio. And he would, today I've talked to him, it's been now almost 20 years later, and I just recently called him as I'm putting together the second edition, which is 2 volumes, and I'm working on the third. It's going to be 3 volumes. Probably end up being 4-volume work before it's done. But there's so much information about it. It's exciting. We now know, in 1980, there were 20 cases, I believe, or so, of multiple personality disorder diagnosed in America. We didn't know what it was. I mean, there was 3 Faces of Eve, which was a fluke. There was Sybil, which was a fluke. But we didn't know that it's a dissociative disorder is like one of the essential ways of looking at a mental health problem. I mean, dissociation is what mental health...
Schizophrenia.
Well, yeah, it's really not even schizophrenia, though. Schizophrenia is a heightened awareness that's very different than what multiple personality disorder is. Oh. And it's now called dissociative identity disorder, thanks to the AMA or the APA, whatever. Not to obfuscate it, but they're just, or maybe to obfuscate it. You can't trust these doctors. You can't trust the AMA. You just can't.
Psychiatric
you can't trust them. There are men in there and women who are good people, but basically they're worried about being sued. They're in it to make money, and frankly, the psychiatrists and psychologists, most of them, the ones I'm talking to, they don't know, even the best of them, they don't know how to treat this. They don't know what to do. They take the long way around. And so one of the things we're doing is we're putting together, after so many years now of looking at this and finally figuring out what it is, we're putting together a group of experts in a group called Freedom of Thought Foundation, which, among other things, we want to provide help for people. And we're going to have to train psychiatrists and psychologists in how to deal with government mind control. And we went back to David after all these years, and I said to David, how's it going? He said, well, I'm still only sleeping 2 hours a night. I'm still having nightmares. I said, what's your most frequent nightmare? He said, it's the recurring one. He said, I see this man being mutilated. His fingers are cut off piece by piece in front of his family, and they're trying to get one of his family members to talk.
Oh, memories that are coming back.
And yeah, so he's remembered being this human tape recorder, witnessing this stuff. And it keeps him from sleeping. And all sorts of other things are a result of this. Well, I started asking him questions, and I said, now your father, he wasn't raised with his father, he left when he was a small child, but his father was an alcoholic who used to beat the kids. Okay, well, this is the basis of dissociation. We find, here's what David represents. David represents that part of the mind control spectrum, which he joined the Air Force, and they studied his Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Index forms. That MMPI shows multiple personality disorder very clearly. So they said, aha, we can use this guy. Right? So they made him a hypno-program courier. That's not all he did. We don't know what all he did because he's very much recovered, but he's still suffering. And now we have the technology and understanding to really help these people.
Could you go into that?
Yeah, well, it's basically the kind of thing that neurolinguistics programming uncovered. And neurolinguistics programming was really a toolbox of stolen from Milton Erickson, Virginia Satir, and various Gestalt, Fritz Perls, and a variety of other disciplines. And when you strip away all the technology from mind control, microwaves and magnetic waves, gravity waves, stuff, you end up with hypnosis. You end up with embedded commands, subliminals, stuff. So it's really basic, and it's really, people think that hypnosis is something, a big, mysterious, I'm going to go to sleep. And can you remember a time when you went to a Halloween party dressed in a costume? Can you?
No, not me personally.
You never went to a Halloween party?
No.
Can you remember one of your birthday parties?
Yes.
All right. And you just looked up to the left, say, when you remember that, which means you're right-handed, and it also means that you're accessing your visual recall bank.
All right. My grandmother was at my left, helping me to cut the cake.
All right. So now, if you were going to direct a movie of this scene, recreate it, but have actors play your scene, how would you improve that scene? Improve it. Improve the scene. Transderivational search. Your eyes just went from right to left at ear level, and then they went up and went left to right, up. So that's called a transderivational search. Okay, now if I wanted to, during the time you were processing that question, I could have given you an embedded command about a dream you might have tonight. You know, and then I would ask you how the weather. Did it rain here yesterday? And then you'd start saying, did it rain? And you wouldn't remember the embedded command. And then you'd probably have the dream. And that's how I would start to influence you. Without any integrity, you know.
Or wires.
Or wires, you know. But the same thing is true if you take ELF, extremely low frequency, different kinds of waves and rays that can be modulated, even microwaves. And of course it'll cook your brain. Some of these things will really do destroy brain cells and what have you. But the guys were coming back. When I was doing in Operation Mind Control is a Strange History, we did 98 radio and television interviews in 33 cities in 30 days on the tour. And when it was put out, and I think that's a world record. I felt like I was in a rock and roll band without the band, you know. And you look out the window, you'd say, where the hell is this? It's raining out. It's miserable at 5 o'clock in the morning. The phone rings, and it's some guy that says, oh, what a lovely day we're having, you know. And you say, where's this? And the guy's calling from New Orleans. You don't know where you are by that time. So, but a guy called me on TV. I was on KPIX in San Francisco, and they were supposed to bus in a bunch of ladies, and the bus, the ladies' club for you had the book author of the day, the chef, the standard ladies' morning format, the television format of 1978. And the bus broke down, so there was nobody in the audience, So they opened the phone lines to San Francisco, which was fortuitous because I got this call, and the director says, "Hey, I think we're in a break," and he says, "We got a commander from the Navy here that says he was part of an assassination team, and he can't remember stuff. You want to talk to him on the air?" And I said, "Yeah, put him on." So on comes this commander, and he says, I was part of a black pajama team that was working behind a fixed border. We call it a fixed border in Southeast Asia. And we were creating accidents that would cause the death of any prominent, any charismatic politician on the local level that was rising up in China. We found out later it was China. He didn't say that on the air, but later I said, was that China? He said, yes. And he said his team they all got back from their tour of duty. They did it for 6 years, I think he said. And they all got the flu, and they all went to Walter Reed Hospital, and, quote, they came out with cardboard memories. So what they were using was electronic dissolution of memory on those guys.
And radio hypnotic.
In other words, just erase the tape of your mind. Just erase it. Now, what are you going to do? You have psychological problems. It's like having amnesia. It's a serious, painful, gnawing. You're stumbling around in an alien world without any reference points, no memory. So then you have to put the memory back. So they show them slides. So they have a two-dimensional reality.
Slides of what?
Of Grandpa and their life growing up as a kid, them and their dog at 8, But they don't have any real tactile and kinesthetic memory. It's criminal, yes it is. Also, the reason we know, like there's the I call it the false memory syndrome foundation. You know, the reason we know that the psychosciences are in such trouble is because when Elizabeth Loftus and others are talking about memory, they're talking about who can remember what, and then how abuse victims, you can't rely on their memories, and they don't know the first thing about how memory works. This guy on television that sells for $39.95 a series of tapes by which you can improve your memory knows more about memory than Elizabeth Loftus and some of these other people, you know, because they don't know the fundamentals of the second signal system and how it works. At least if they know it, they're not talking about it, and they're not approaching. I mean, I just don't think that they have any solid basis. They go by studies and databases, and you know how statistics lie, you know, but they don't have the nuts and bolts by which they can operate this mechanism of the mind. And now there are people that do, and unfortunately, not too many of them are in the psychosciences, you know. But we're going to put together a group. We've done a workshop for psychiatrists and psychologists, and we're putting together some of the handlers, the people that were the mind controllers of the past generation, some of the people that worked on the project, so-called Project Monarch, where they created presidential models, people that worked in Project 100,000, that hypno-programmed with 100,000 people. The handlers, we're putting the handlers together with the psychiatrists and the doctors to teach them the codes, cues, and triggers for the different kinds of mind control. The SEAL teams, the Navy SEAL team, also the, what's the other team, where's no insignias, the ones that went to Waco?
ATF.
No, not ATF. They wear just black pajamas. It's in the book, I don't want to look. But these guys are hypno-programmed. And the programming is not that perfect. I mean, it's like getting a military education, you know, is not a very great education because, you know, by the time it's got so watered down to the lowest common denominator, you know, like Juliana McKinney is in Washington at the, what's it called, the Electronic Harassment Project of the National Security Alumni Association. And she said that she learned NLP in the Army as an Army spy, you know, Army intelligence agent. She learned neurolinguistics programming, but she can't use it. I said, why not? She says, well, you know how the government education is, you know, it's just not any good. It's like the lowest common denominator, you know, it's watered down. People that taught the people that taught the people that taught the people that taught the people are teaching us, you know. And it's, she says, I can't use it. You know, she said, I never got it, I never understood, but it would be it's an important tool for all of us. I think it's got to become part of our educational system, and it's a great way to for self-defense.
Yeah, the compartmentalization and need-to-know basis and it degrades the quality of the research.
Well, also the authoritarian, pyramid, linear, chain of command kind of organization is not very creative. Second signal system reinforcement is everything. A baby's laying in the crib and it's got this, imagine you got an orange Nerf ball hanging over its head. You, trademark Nerf ball. The baby's instinct is to reach up and touch this soft, warm, furry, orange ball. And when it touches it, at first it just sees this orange, whatever it is. But when it touches it, it understands that it's not cold, that it's not too hot, it's not menacing, it's orange, warm, furry, and it understands it and remembers what the Nerf ball is. So then you'll see the baby slap it and laugh and start interacting with the Nerf ball or whatever. But until that time, it's just curiosity makes it reach out and touch it. So you'll see a kid likewise when it's just beginning to walk. It will stick it to you. Imagine you got a glowing pot-bellied stove across the room. The kid walks up, and if you don't stop it, he'll put his hand on that cherry red stove. It'll do it once. That's aversive reaction. I mean, aversive therapy. Ouch, burn. no more. Now you move away from the stove. But life is an adjustment between the urge toward eureka, and actually that's the pleasure center. When you discover the wow, that's pleasure center stimulus, and I think it's the most powerful motivational force in human nature. Not sex, as Freud said, or not survival, as Darwin said. I think the eureka is what has made man come to this stage. I hope we continue. Unfortunately, we run up against the National Security Act, National Security curtain, and that's what's keeping the eureka secret. All of our problems of society today, looks to me like, can be tracked right straight to the National Security Act. But that's another subject.
Are you aware of any attempts to suppress your book?
Well, I haven't been able to prove any. I got a lawyer for a while, and it seems just common sense. I can put together a pretty good argument. And in the beginning of the book, in the preface, I mentioned I got a lot of death threats. The book was taken off the shelf by Dell. Another book that was very harmless. The difference, it was based on the CIA documents that were released in the Freedom of Information Act. But mine wasn't. Mine was based on the research that I did, talking to people. And then I just used the documents to underline and prove the case. But this other book was mainly only the documents and handed out the way the CIA handed them out. And that was taken by Dell and replaced mine. And it's still in their list.
What was the name?
That was John Marks, the Manchurian Candle. Oh. And it's still in their list now. And I understand Marx has quit doing the research. I mean, he's on to something else. I don't know what he's doing. But I think that was disinformation. I mean, it didn't tell the truth, but the main difference was I said this is operational, and he said it's just experiments. We didn't come up with anything. We spent all this money. Oh, how silly, you know. And I said this is the most important thing since the atom bomb. You know, this is the Diane. I love Diane Dupree's poem Rant. You know, the only war there is the war against the imagination. The only war there is the war against the imagination, and all other wars are subsumed by it.
And what is the brain bomb that I've heard or read about?
Brain bomb, yes. Well, it's probably something like the neutron bomb, you know, except it doesn't kill the people, it just erases the tape, you know. Just the way it leaves you stumbling around. And how about that? Can you imagine? I can see a science fiction
like
film.
Ed Muskie, Ed Muskie?
Yeah, sure. You know, there's a number of things that can do that. Number of different things. Ed Muskie, remember George Romney said, I was brainwashed. Jack Ruby said, I was brainwashed. You know, just listen to what people say. Yesterday at this Brain Mind Symposium here in, what's the name of this hotel? The Continental Hotel near LAX. There were 100 people there. And I asked them, how many of you have been brainwashed? And then every one of them raised their hand. I said, how many of you have been mind controlled? About 10% raised their hand. I said, how many of you cannot, absolutely cannot, how many of you believe that you cannot be made to change your mind, change your belief against your knowledge and without your consent? Only one person raised their hand. So it gives you an idea of what people are experiencing. And then I ask them questions about their government, how they felt about it. And I'm telling you, it's a cynical time. Now, this might not be these are people that got up out of bed and came down here to hear me talk, you know. So it's a different view. And thank you, guys, for mentioning it on the radio. Several of them came up to me and said, I heard about you on the radio, and I came down, you know. So, appreciate it. But it was an interesting audience. It's people that are concerned now. And I think there's a groundswell rising. And one part of this is, the thing I talked about mostly was the abolition of the National Security Act. We've got to, God bless Hazel area, you know. Department of Energy. It used to be called the Atomic Energy Commission, you know. Now it's the Department of Energy. She releases 33 million documents, right? And, you know, God bless her. But there's still, that's 3 miles high, pile of documents.
Is that mostly what came out recently on the radiation?
Yeah.
I suspect.
Well, yeah, but they're still doing it. I mean, they can't, it's 3 miles high pile of papers. And they haven't got to the, since it's been, a month or so now? They're not finished Xerox it yet, the first set, you know. But there's 33 million documents left that they haven't released. And I don't consider the Department of Energy part of the cryptocracy, really. I mean, it's sort of, you know, she says, I have looked into the faces and eyes of people doing battle with their government. And she's going to have to look into a lot more faces and eyes, and we're going to have to look into not only the Secretary of the Department of Energy, the Secretary of the Health, Education, and Welfare, the Veterans Administration, and on and on and on, as well as the entire national security establishment, CIA, DIA, NSA, on and on and on. We don't need that. We don't need that. I approached Tom Bearden yesterday and I said, we're going to abolish the National Security Act. And he kind of sort of lurched backward. And I said, he said, well, we need some, there's some secrets we got to keep. And I said, you need military secrets. He said, yes. I said, well, military can do that. You don't need this National Security Act. He said, well, you're right. And I said, then you're going to join us? He says, oh, yes. Yes, I'll join you. We'll abolish the National Security Act. And Fletcher Prouty has joined us on the Freedom of Thought Foundation. He said, Harry S. Truman said that the worst thing he ever did was to sign the National Security Act. And he said it created the CIA and the NSA. He said the CIA is nothing but a war-making body. You know, it's manipulating our government. It's manipulating our society. I saw a bunch of journalists talking. What's wrong with journalism? The American people want us to do something about democracy. We can't save democracy. We can barely save journalism, they say. They said the American public doesn't believe in us as journalists anymore. They don't believe in us. We're as slimy as lawyers, in effect. And the reason is because they're not talking about anything relevant. All the secrets are behind the national security curtain. Let's talk about fusion. Let's talk about solving the energy problem. The technology already exists and has for years. We don't need a fossil fuel economy. It's over. The cat's out of the bag. Those of us that are readers and researchers know this. I personally was told by one of the top people at the Mellon Bank years ago, we're going to trim the fat from this economy. A guy named Addison A. Vestal, who was the tax man for the Mellon family, said, we're going to trim the fat from this economy in 1968. We're going to create the oil crisis. Our partners in Kuwait, you know, we funded the royal family in Kuwait. There was just a bunch of naked Bedouins out there, you know. And he tells me the whole story of what has happened in the last 20 years. And of course, at the time, I said, this can't be. You know, I don't believe this. You know? But it happened. So now I know there's a conspiracy against the future. And he told me, he said, I was into Buckminster Fuller a lot, reading about that, world resources inventory and stuff. And I said, well, this fossil fuel economy is in kind of days numbered. He says, well, yeah, but we're going to pump every drop of oil out of the ground at top dollar before we make the capital commitment to alternatives. You know, and I said, well, what are the alternatives? Solar? He said, well, it's solar and wind. And he said, but the main thing is going to be fusion. And I said, well, what is fusion? They can't do that. They can't contain plasma and all the other things. He says, you're right. Cooling, the two problems on the planet here are cooling the reactor once you start it, and containing that ball of plasma. He said, well, we solved that. And I said, how? He says, we have a company called General Atomics, and it's owned half by Gulf and half by Westinghouse. And we're putting it in orbit. The plasma, and so it's gravity-less, and it sits there, and you just vent it out in space and cool it, and then you beam the electricity back to Nevada or wherever, microwave, and distribute it. And that was in 1968. Well, they had the windfall profits tax then, remember, on the oil price? Well, then they took General Atomics, which was nothing more than a paper shell with some patents, I suppose. And they bellied it up and they took a $5 billion write-off. So that's the way the game is played by the international corporations. And it's the new world order, folks. That's what it is.
Well, tell us, Walter, generally, what are the objectives of mind control?
to cover the secrets of the slaves that buried the pharaoh, so to speak. The objectives of mind control are to create a psycho-civilized society, according to Delgado, Yale professor, CIA-funded Jose Delgado.
Office of Naval Research.
Yeah, in other words, we can have a bunch of. We don't need the robots anymore. You know, they really don't know what they're doing. If you take the meta view of this thing, you realize that when any new technology envelops the old technology, and the old technology becomes obsolete, and therefore it becomes an art form. So as we've created the satellite technology, we surrounded the Earth by this very fragile, delicate, it's going to become like a spider web of technology, satellite technology, surrounding the Earth. And that's the high ground. So, you know, in military strategy, whoever's got the high ground has the advantage. So we look back down the Earth is obsolete. So it's finally already occurred to the cryptocrats, who we don't have the need to know. We're just so many rats in a maze to these guys in the present mindset of government. Right? And that's why more than half of the population of the United States has been experimented on in one form or another. So what they're going to do, and this is the problem we've got to face, and this is the purpose of the mind control, this is where mind control fits in, is they're going to engineer the planet Earth. They're going to terraform, planetary engineering. But when you have bureaucrats doing it, all you can have is grandfathered clauses, you know, that say, okay, you're a pygmy in Africa, right? That means you're naked, yeah, and you know, you use blowguns or whatever, and you live in the bush. Now, if Jerry decides to sell TV sets to the pygmies, right, out of the sky, a laser beam will shoot and zap Jerry's cerebellum or something, and so or else he goes to jail for selling satellite dish to the pygmies, because they cannot be allowed to exit their time space. They're in quarantine. They're in a time quarantine, right? So LA maybe will be the only creative space on Earth, you know, where anything goes, and it'll have a blackout over it, and anything goes, and you can think anything and do anything in LA. Of course, it'll be total chaos, as it is already, you know. But this is creativity. Creativity is chaos, you know, and it's this wonderful interplay of chaos, not order. But otherwise, we're going to order the entire thing, and you know, when you freedom, unfortunately for these guys and their way of thinking, our founding fathers granted us the inalienable right of freedom of speech. So they can't stop you from speaking, but if they can stop you from thinking or direct your thoughts, they can control what you say, and that's what it's all about.
In his recent book, The Controllers, subtitled Modern Myth, Mass Manipulation, and the New Hypothesis of Alien Abductions, Martin Cannon says the image of an alien from a UFO provides an effective cover story to disguise the faces of the real abductors, namely psychiatrists, cryptocrats, and other operatives of the national security state in Halloween masks, so to speak. The experiment being done by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Naval Intelligence, CIA, universities, etc., in such areas as electronic stimulation of the brain, hypnotic resistance to torture, microwave induction of intracerebral voices, and electronic dissolution of memory, need victims. And how better to evade responsibility for these crimes than to blame them on aliens? Could you comment on that?
Well, I'd say well put, Martin Cannon. I mean, well done. It seems I really want to see these higher and more advanced beings that are millions of years more evolved than us come here and help us out, because I think we need help. I think the human race is in a big mess. But unfortunately, it looks like Martin Cannon is right. It took me a couple of years to come to terms with that, or at least he's partially right. I don't think he's explained the entire UFO thing by his thesis. I think the book is worth reading, The Controllers. But But I've since done my own research and found out that there is much more to Cannon's thesis than even Cannon knew about. And we, because now we have a number of the monarch victims and other survivors of mind control, the government mind control, who are telling us that as children 15 or 20 years ago, they were inside of a gray costume, so to speak, an articulated costume, very advanced for its day. And they played a role in pulling off a fake abduction scenario for somebody that was under influence of drugs. The first story I heard was they'd given this guy sodium amytal, and there he is, sort of floating in and out of the Twilight Zone, and they're making him believe that he's been abducted. But recently, one of these handlers says it's done with stun guns. It's done with high voltage electricity. And he said, if you'll get me a volunteer at one of these workshops, that one of the things we want to put together, you're going to have to sign off with the volunteer that pardon us from any liabilities, but he's going to induce an alien abduction experience with this high voltage electricity zap, and amnesia as well, and a post-embedded command, just like, and he's going to do it just like the alien scenario is. So the cattle mutilations and all of that, they're called screens and scrambles. I'm working with a psychologist now who does not wish to be named because it's such a controversial area of research, and the psychiatric and psychological community is so highly political and so involved with so much big money and so corrupt that she says, I don't want people to know who I am right now. But she's doing a lot of research, and she's made a graph and cross-correlated the different ritual abuse phenomena, the random abuse phenomena, alien abduction phenomena, and mind control phenomena. And it's really all the same. It follows a pattern. It's all the same. And so that's what makes it unique. We know also from the testimony of people who are recovering from this mind control stuff, that it's not someone 30 years, in 30, 35 years. They're just now beginning to remember what they did. And some of the things, they were from multiple generational incest families, a lot of them women, 70-80%. And of course, because of the anatomy and physiology of females, sex can be a very traumatic experience. And especially the abuse, sexual abuse at an early age as a child.
I'd like to ask you about that subject, especially in regard to the Franklin cover-up.
Yes. Some of these people are the ones that I'm talking about. Even Paul Benassi was.
Right. Right.
He was one of the informants, and he describes. It's not widely known, but he describes an alien situation. He calls it alien programming.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, do you think that the efforts to discredit the returning memories of these victims is an attempt by the psychiatrists to protect this method of mind control?
Yeah, well, I think they're trying to. Yeah, I think they're trying to.
I mean, that's what they
them.
call false memory.
Yeah, spindrome is what I call it. Well, it's not a syndrome. It's not scientifically a syndrome. They're very rigid. There's a definition to the word syndrome, and the thing that's being described as the false memory syndrome doesn't fit the definition. It's not a syndrome. So I call it a spindrome. I think the false memory phenomenon is a lot of hot air. I mean, it's not only a lot of hot air. I think it's a deliberate. Martin T. Orrin, and a couple of other MK Ultra psychiatrists are on that board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
Well, Peter Breggin says that these psychiatrists get around in groups and they make up these phrases,
Yes.
attention deficit disorder.
Yeah, that's right.
They're just pure.
That's right. I talked to Colin Ross, who's probably the leading man on multiple personality disorder. President of and all that stuff. He's a Canadian, and he's trying to live down work. And he said, I said to him, oh, you know, the psychiatrists are the ones that created this whole mind control mess. He made a statement that military or government mind control is going to keep psychiatry alive for the next 10 years. Because people are, you know, this is obsolete now, the way they did it now. They're turning these people loose. They're not killing them. They used to kill them, these kind of spies, you know. Now they're just turning them loose, and you got armies of zombies walking around, people with no memories and scrambled memories and all kinds of psychological traumas, traumatized, dissociated, multiple personality disorder. But there's a difference between a random person who's just been abused by some drunk father, say, and a military. Somebody who's been taken as a child, an MPD child, and then developed and disciplined. And then there's also a difference in the alien. The alien abductee is very passive. It's like their soul has been pacified, you know. And the regular abuse victim is angry. It's got a tremendous amount of anger. So it's very interesting to see the difference. But they all describe the same thing. You know, if you go down the chart, you can't believe the similarities in set and setting, and you know, animate and inanimate objects that they've described. Psychiatry. Look, it does, you know, the technology that we have now discovered, the electronics, you know, the stun gun techniques, the thing I call it neurolinguistics programming, which was partly a CIA, result of a CIA effort. All this information, it's now leaking out into the public. Conceivably, a Delta Force was the thing I was looking for before, the guys in the black pajamas. They're hypno-programmed. Conceivably, you could take the Delta Force guys and find out their codes, cues, and triggers and turn them around against their commanding officers. You see what I mean? So what can be done can be undone. Anything that can mind control, anybody that knows the codes, cues, and triggers can take over from the handler. You know, I turn the thing around.
Bringing back people's memories seems to be a more difficult problem.
Well, it's not just the memories. It's like the trauma that's comes with the memory. But there are ways now to treat that you know, psychiatry has got to learn. Like psychiatry cannot cure a phobia, but I can cure a phobia in 10 minutes, you know.
Could you be more specific on that?
Well, neurolinguistics programming can cure a phobia in 10 minutes.
And but the memories?
You dissociate from the memories, and you look at the memory like a movie screen, and there's a technique involved, and you look at it over and over again until you're bored with it, right? And then you go on and you're free of it. So your phobia is gone. Well, a lot of the fear is what's being used here. Fear motivates people. Fear is trauma, you know, and trauma creates phobias. I saw my teacher get 5 people who couldn't wash their face because they'd almost drowned. You know, had a phobia of water. They used Noxzema. They consumed great quantities of face creams and stuff. And he got them to swim within 15 minutes. And one lady is the kind of person, I know another person is this way, their bones are so heavy that they sink, they don't float. She dove in and sank to the bottom of the pool and was swimming, doing the frog kicks, and swam up to the shallow end and stood up and said, "Wow, I can swim," you know. And she was cured forever, you know, of her phobia. Now she can wash her face and take a shower and whatever. But and all phobias can be cured, but I don't think psychiatry knows this. I mean, the general no psychiatrist doesn't know how to do this.
Well, they're into pharmaceuticals.
They're into suppressing, giving drugs and suppressing the symptoms. You know?
Dr. Bowart has utilized psychoelectronic techniques, employing a device called the brain tuner to help people off heroin and other addictions. What can you tell us about some of the positive uses of these techniques?
Well, all of it. Every one of these mind control techniques has been used to enslave people. It really did. I mean, some of the electronic realm of it is new, but all of it is as old as mankind. the use of sound and color and lights, mantra and mudra and all that, the Sufi meditation and things. Those are very positive things, and they use the same technology that is being used to enslave people. So, any of this can be turned around, and Bob is doing some great work. He has sold, he's worked for the government, and he's probably feeling a little guilty about some of the things that he's done, the way they've been put to use. I would think that the psychiatric community, Colin Ross said to me, I said, virtually every doctor in the psychiatric community of a certain generation works for Operation Project Mind Control. He says, you're absolutely right. And I said, then that means you guys got a lot of work to do to clean it up. You made the mess, now you got to clean it up. And he said, absolutely right.
Thanks, Walter. We'll return in a moment.